And so if you take the thread and follow the thread, and sometimes digging in the Bible is like you find folds in it between words. And between the words where you thought there was nothing, you find stuff because you opened up the fold and looked in there. And so I don't know if you've ever had this experience or not. I'm sure you have. I still have places in the Bible that I don't fully understand. Now, I'm not talking about, wild prophetic stuff so much as I'm talking about even in narratives at times. You read through, you're reading something, and there's a little alarm bell that goes off that says, you didn't quite get all that was there. And there are places I've read through time and time again, and I'm still uneasy with something in there because the details don't all seem to match up. And I know they do. I know there's an explanation for it. And so I wanted to show you something like that tonight. I've read Genesis 37. You can turn there. 37, 38, for as long as I've been reading the Bible. Of course, as most of you have, most of you preachers anyway, and hopefully most of you folks, you have the habit of reading the Bible. I'm sure you probably read the Bible through rather than playing Bible roulette. And that's good. And so you read through it, and you read through it, and you read through it. And every time I read through here, up until just I'd say a year or so ago, I read through here, and, just as I read through all the sellout of Joseph by the brethren, and then you go to chapter 38, there's just something that doesn't sit right with it. And I guess I got accustomed to the warning light, the bell going off. And so it took me a while to get to the fact that there's something here that I'm not getting. And so rather than read it first and then explain it, we're going to go ahead and pray now. Brother Reese, would you pray for me, please?
Father, we do thank you tonight for this King James Bible.
Mm-hmm.
Lord, we thank you for the depth of it. Lord, we're thankful for the Holy Spirit that will illuminate truths that the natural eyes have never seen. And God, I pray that you use Pastor Stevens tonight as a vessel meet for the Master's use. Lord, open our eyes that we may behold wondrous things out of your law.
Mm.
We thank you tonight for the Lord Jesus Christ. I pray the word of God will be exalted, and our Savior will be glorified and pleased. We pray that you be with the message now. In Jesus' precious name, amen.
Amen. Thank you very much, brother. All right, in Genesis 37, the brethren have gotten fed up with Joseph, and they are now prepared because of distance from home and all those things to do something about it. You see down in verse 22 that Reuben is on the side of not killing him, and he shows up a little bit later. We'll talk more about him in a minute. But in verse 23, it came to pass when Joseph was coming to his brethren that they stripped Joseph out of his coat of many colors that was on him. And they took him and cast him into a pit, and the pit was empty, there was no water in it. And they sat down to eat bread, and they lifted up their eyes and looked, and behold, a company of Ishmaelites came from Gilead with their camels bearing spicery and balm and myrrh, going to carry it down to Egypt. And Judah now, said unto his brethren, what profit is it if we slay our brother? So they're thinking about killing him. That's an amazing, I don't have brothers, I have all sisters. I thought about killing them, but, no, I'm just kidding. But you stop and think about, to seriously consider killing your brother. That's wild. And so these guys are seriously considering this. It says down in verse 26, what profit is it if we slay our brother and conceal his blood? And just like Judah, we're not going to, what profit is it? Let's sell him instead. We'll get nothing out of it if we just kill him. Wow, cold-blooded, cold as a shark, man. And it goes on down in verse, verse 27. Come and let us sell him to the Ishmaelites. Let not our hand be upon him. He is our brother and our flesh, and his brethren were content. Some cold-blooded brethren there. Content to sell him. And so it says in verse 28 that there passed by Midianites, merchantmen. They drew and lifted up Joseph out of the pit and sold Joseph into the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. They brought Joseph into Egypt. Now I just need to make sure that you jump in the passage with me here, and that you can picture what's going on. I'm nowhere near the storyteller Brother Peacock is, but I'll tell you this. I mean, that boy came in, and he walked into camp, and a couple of those guys got him by the arms, and he goes, "Oh, what are you doing?" And I mean, before he knows it, they've untied his tunic, his coat of many colors, which his father gave him, which was such a burr under their saddle. And they'd stripped him out of it, and he's down to his breeches only or something like that, and they pitch him in that pit where there is no water. And at first, he's just indignant, and then he's mad. And now he's down in the bottom of this pit, and there's no water, and there's no air. I mean, he is baking in the sun, and he keeps calling them, "Okay, guys, enough is enough." Never crossed his mind that they had contemplated killing him, much less that they would wind up contemplating selling him and then selling him. And so he's getting down, sitting down there, and he says, "Now, hey, Gad, Asher, could you get me some water anyway? This has gone far enough, guys." And once in a while, one of the brethren, particularly Simeon and Levi, who were both cruel, the Bible says, they'd come over to the edge of the pit. And, he thought that eventually somebody'd come over and pitch him a rope or something. But they'd go and they'd look over into that pit with cold, squinty eyes. And he'd be appealing to them, and they'd just turn and walk away. And in a little while, he's still crying out. And after Judah then walks up and looks down into that pit with snake eyes, there's something that starts stirring in Joseph's breast. Some panic, a little bit of panic starts rising. A little while, he hears a commotion up in the camp. He hears a bunch of bells dinging and some, donkeys braying and some camels and stuff up there moving around. Plainly, there's been another party arrive. It's a batch of Midianites, Ishmaelites. And in a minute, a couple of those dark-skinned guys come over and look down into the pit like they're assessing him, which they were. And Joseph is looking up there, and he's no longer making an appeal. His brethren look at him like a cold, dead fish. In a minute, the Ishmaelites pitch a rope down. He grabs onto the knot at the end of the rope, and they pull him up and drag him out. And he's just about to get to his feet and protest when those Ishmaelites, 3 of them, grab him, one on each arm and one behind, and start dragging him towards a cart, a wooden wheeled cart with some bars on it, like an old-fashioned jailhouse cart or something like that. And he's kicking and screaming, and finally gets to the point where he almost breaks away and gets down to one arm, and one of those Ishmaelites takes the butt end of an ox goad and slams him 6 inches above his belly button. He's down like an ox. And before he can get his breath back, they actually have him in the cart. In the cart, he's still indignant, he's crying, and soon he starts to lose his composure. Because what he's seeing as he looks outside, through the bars of the cart, he sees a couple of those Ishmaelites walk up to Judah and put some money in his hand and walk away. And then he starts making this appeal, this panicked appeal. "Come on, guys, you can't do this. You're crazy. This has to be a joke. Let me go, let me go." And it just kept going on, and pretty soon, they start, the cart starts moving away. And like I said, he begins composure, and he starts to really cry like he had never cried before. He's a 17-year-old boy, and he's still young enough to cry, but he's never cried like this before. And he loses his composure. He's sobbing and weeping and really starts wailing like a woman. And the last thing in his brethren's ears are here, off goes Joseph, wailing like a woman. And he's gone, and the rest follows. It says in verse 31, "And they took Joseph's coat, killed a kid of the goats, and dipped the coat in the blood. And they sent the coat of many colors, and they brought it to their father and said, 'This have we found. Know now whether it be thy son's coat or no.' And he knew it and said, 'It is my son's coat.' An evil beast had devoured him. Joseph is without doubt rent in pieces. And Jacob rent his clothes and put sackcloth on his loins and mourned for his son many days. And all his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. And he said, For I will go down unto the grave unto my son mourning. Thus his father wept for him. The Midianites sold him into Egypt unto Potiphar, the officer of Pharaoh and the captain of the guard. Those boys went home knowing that they had watched Judah, perhaps Judah. It was Judah's idea to sell him. I don't know if it was Judah's idea to dip the coat in the blood or not, but it was a cold-blooded thing. Whoever came up with the idea was cold-blooded. And so some of the brethren, 2 or 3 of the younger ones, maybe Gad or Asher or Naphtali, they probably in standing there had some conscience and had, digging their toe into the ground just a little bit because they weren't comfortable with this. One of them had tried to go grab Judah's arm saying, "Judah, we can't do this." And he had turned and shoved him down and said, "You shut your mouth, don't you dare tell our father." It was a cold-blooded thing. And so you've now gotten Joseph sold into slavery. And Judah was one of the main cogs, verse 26. Judah said to his brethren, "What profit is it if we slay our brother, conceal his blood?" And so you now have seen Joseph hauled off into Egypt. And then comes, and this is what bothered me, then comes chapter 38. You've just watched an innocent kid be sold off by a bunch of wicked brethren. They've sold their brother. And I want to go on. I have to go all the way to chapter 39 to get the rest of the story and pick it up about why is the Lord interrupting? Why is the Lord interrupting Joseph's plight to tell me some stuff that Judah did? And I'm tired of Judah already. I mean, I know the Bible enough to know that, we now read the Bible kind of backwards. We know this happened with the knowledge that Judah became a great man. But if this is your first time through the Bible, you don't know that. And by the time I'm start reading, the Lord breaks from Joseph's terrible plight to go to chapter 38 to tell me about Judah going off with this dirtbag, the Adullamite, Hira the Adullamite. And there he goes and sees a woman. Notice down in verse 2, Joseph saw there a daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua, and he took her and went in unto her. Did he love her? It doesn't say he loved her. It said he just took her, went unto her, and wound up begetting three kids by her. Judah goes on, and this chapter goes on and tells how 2 of the boys were wicked, and he promised Tamar, his daughter-in-law, to the 3rd one when he grew up, and he wound up not doing that. And so he goes off. As you well know, Tamar pretended to be a prostitute, and he goes into her and all those things, and it comes back to shame him because now she's pregnant by his father-in-law. But you go from Joseph's innocent plight, Joseph did nothing wrong, into this scumbag, dirtbag scenario, this scuzzy soap opera, this sordid soap opera of Judah's shenanigans. Say that's what caught my attention. I finally figured it out. It bothered me that the Lord broke from an innocent man's plight to tell me about this dirtball's sordid soap opera. And I just said, "Lord, why'd you do that?" And he said, "Because I'm trying to show you something." And so I want to talk to you for a little while here tonight about Joseph and Judah. Because if you'll ask yourself what that's about, historically speaking, what you're seeing here between Genesis 37 and 38 is actually 2 of the greatest men that God ever used. One, as you know, is Joseph, and we know him to be one of the greatest types of Christ in the Bible, right? Dr. Ruckman always said he was numerically the greatest type of Christ. I actually never went through and numbered them all, but I wouldn't doubt that it's true, right? And then you have Judah. And you know about Judah. As it turns out, he is the progenitor of Jesus Christ. The line of the tribe of Judah comes through him. The Bible says, "The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the lawgiver from between his feet." And so you're actually looking at 2 of the greatest men in the Bible. 2 of the men that God so blessed and so used in the Word of God. And he's got these 2 guys side by side, and they're coming from absolutely different vectors. I mean, one guy is all the way on the other side, innocent, did nothing wrong. It's not his fault. Winds up sold into slavery, has some long years in front of him. The other guy is rough as a cob. We're going to learn more about him in just a little bit, but I mean, he is cold-hearted, cruel, and yet the Lord did something with him, and he wound up getting on track and being one of the greatest men in the Bible. You say, what are you getting at there? I'm telling you, ladies and gentlemen, that if you learn something tonight, it's the fact that character matters, that integrity matters, and that whether you are a spoiled cupcake like Joseph, or whether you are a rough and tumble, cruel, hard nose like Judah, the Lord has a wheel to put you on, and he's the potter, and you're the clay. And he's going to try to do something with the vessel, and it'll just depend on whether the clay will yield itself to it. Been hearing all week about you got to acknowledge some things. You got to make sure that you're the one. You got to climb on the wheel and let the potter do his work. Amen? So we're going to talk about that for a little while. These are two very different men. They come from two very different places. They're in the same family, kind of different universe, you know? I mean, Joseph has been his father's favorite. He has a coat of many colors. He's been a spoiled brat for as long as he's been around. A little bit precocious and so on and so forth. Judah has come up in the rough and tumble part of the family that was Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. Reuben went up to his father's couch. He's unstable as water, sinned against his own father. Simeon and Levi are both cruel messengers. They went in and killed the Hivites. So these guys are coming from entirely different vectors, yet God's showing you them side by side, chapter to chapter, to show you what he's willing to work with. This room tonight is filled, and I'm not going to call, you become aware after you get as old as I am that you have a young group of folks coming up. And I want you guys to know I'm not calling you cupcakes, okay? Because I know that some of you probably have faced some things already that makes you not a cupcake. But it shows you that the Lord takes folks from both ends of the spectrum and in between. And everybody here is somewhere in between. And we'll talk about that for a little while. Let me talk to you first of all about the biographical facts, okay? You know these. Both these men, Joseph and Judah, are the sons of Jacob. Jacob is known as the supplanter. Now, he's a finagler. He's a schemer. He's a planner. Jacob always has a plan. He has plan A, plan B, and plan C, and they all involve making money. They all involve him somehow coming out on top, and he always seems to manage to do that. But he's a schemer. Doesn't matter what the Lord wants him to do. He's got a plan just in case God's plan falls through. You see that over and over again. You see it in various things in his lifetime. We'll talk more about it in a second. But so these two guys both come from imperfect parentage. So whatever else is the case, you know already that the Lord is going to deal with both cupcakes and hard noses, even when their families, even when part of it was their family's fault. He's going to deal with imperfect families. So learn this. By the time you're 25, it ain't your parents' fault anymore. And I don't want to get off too deep into it. I just want to say this because I think I need a release. I'm sorry about what's going wrong in your life. What's going wrong today is not the fault of somebody 160 years ago. Whatever else you can say, there may have been many things that went wrong, and they may still be going wrong in your view in your life, but it's not somebody's fault 160 years ago any more than it's your father and mother's fault today if you're 30. So quit blaming them. But the Lord works with imperfect parentage. First of all, Joseph. He's a favorite son. He's pampered. He's spoiled. He's doted upon. His father was doted upon by his mommy. Jacob, right? Rebecca? Remember that little scene? And so since Jacob's favorite wife, Joseph's mother, is now dead, Jacob has proceeded to both mommy and daddy Joseph. And so he's been babied, he's been pampered, he's been spoiled his whole life. He's been given special gifts that the rest of his brothers haven't got. Besides that, he's a little bit precocious. He's been given some gifts, and he started prophesying some things that were true, but still it rubbed the brethren the wrong way, and they hated his guts. But he's the doted upon son. He is the cupcake. He never had to work with a shovel. The rest of the brethren had to work, but he was always kept around the house in his nice, pretty little coat and doted upon by daddy. And the brethren hate his guts for it. Right? Here you have Judah. Comes from the entirely different end of the spectrum. He is the son of the ill-favored and hated Leah. Right? Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah were Leah's sons. And, of course, Leah, she was the hated one. And Jacob wanted Rachel and served for Rachel. And instead, on the first try, he got Leah. And he woke up the next morning and went, whoa, it's Leah. And it didn't go good from there. And from that point, you know, Leah is almost pitiful in her insecurity. You remember the time that she goes in and she buys Jacob's attention with her kids' mandrakes. I mean, Jacob by this point is being passed back and forth by all these wives that he's got, and Leah is she's just longing for attention. And so Judah has sat around and watched his own mother suffer from those things. You remember the little plan that Jacob came up with when he was afraid of going and meeting Esau? I mean, he puts his handmaids in the front. They'll get killed first, and then Leah third, so she'll get killed third, and then his favorite wife and kids fourth, so they'll get killed last. That's got to make a woman feel really good. It's better than chocolates. So he grows up in this pack of the rest of his brethren. He's, again, his older brothers, Reuben, Simeon, and Levi. And Reuben is unstable as water, even though he's the firstborn. He doesn't fit the mold very well. Goes up and defiles his father's couch and is never the same. Never could step up and lead. The best he can come up with is, oh, let's not kill him. That's the best he can come up with. As far as Simeon and Levi, they're the ones that went in and killed the Hivites after they had their circumcisions. And after the deal was made with Jacob, they found them helpless and went in and killed the whole village. I mean, cruel. Just cruel as can be, just murderously cruel. And so, while being spoiled, it doesn't really help a child much in his character. Neither does growing up with that. You kind of tend to grow up to be a reprobate and a punk. And from what I can see, that's pretty much what Judah was before the Lord did something with him. He was a stinking punk. He was a reprobate. And he's willing to sell his brother off. These are two very different men. Two very different ways that God has to deal with somebody. However, I'll say that both these guys wound up getting on the wheel. And so besides the biographical facts, let me talk to you for just a couple minutes about some background experience. And again, Joseph is favored. He's the favorite. Got some special gifts. He's been doted upon. He's daddy's boy. You know, all the rest of the boys had to work for their jalopies for a first car, but his daddy bought him his first car. It was a 3-year-old Mustang with 30,000 miles on it. And daddy bought the whole thing for him. You know, he's been doted upon. He's been spoiled. Jacob seems oblivious to the fact that the rest of the brethren hate his guts. And he still just keeps doting on him. And so Joseph winds up tattletaling on the boys one time and brings to their father their ill report, and he chews them up one side and down the other and says, thank you so much, Joseph, for telling me. And I mean, the brethren just looked at him. If looks could kill, he'd have been dead a long time ago. I say, what's the point, Brother Stevens? Well, not many spoiled brats amount to much. And as soon as I say that, I think of where I live. American Christians in Laodicea. We're talking about Joseph being a cupcake. Has there ever been a generation of people that have been less challenged, that have been less molded by fire and sword and flame? You go back to the pioneer days, and those guys, I mean, when they reached the Ohio River, they were far west, out off the edge of the world. I mean, they were out in the middle of nowhere, subject to Indians and everything. There was a certain point in Texas, past a certain north-south line, that back in the 1830s or so, I mean, if you strayed past that line, you were Comanche meat. You were going to get yourself killed. In fact, it was all but guaranteed that you would be killed. You think about what the world calls the greatest generation in World War II, those that stormed Normandy Beach and so on. You think about the guys that fought the trench warfare of World War I. Even think about Vietnam and so on. Has there ever been a generation that has been less challenged? Has there ever been a generation that really is a bunch of cupcakes? You say, we've been through COVID. I'm just making jokes because I know that some folks have perished because of it. I know that, but most of us that have had a fever for a couple of days and got back up and went on. People have died for a long time from pneumonia and malaria and all kinds of stuff. I'm just glad to know that the flu and the pneumonia is completely cured now and everybody's just dying of COVID. Now, I'm not going very, very deep in it. I'm just saying, folks, we haven't been challenged much at all. You know what this is? This is a bucket. You know what's in the bucket? Baby blue and pink sprinkles. You know what I'm doing? I'm flinging sprinkles on the cupcakes. Because that's what we are. And so as soon as I start talking about cupcakes and Joseph, you go, yeah, well, I got a carry permit. Yeah, a cupcake with a belly band. Nice. Nice. But nevertheless, here's Joseph. And yeah, he's a cupcake. But he did something that a lot of cupcakes don't do. And he crawled on a potter's wheel. And I mean, the fact is he didn't have any choice. They pitched him in the pit, drug him out of the pit, hit him in the belly and put him out, threw him in the back of the wagon. And he either had to sink or swim. But that clay crawled onto that potter's wheel and let the potter work on him. You say, can God use me? Well, he used Joseph. And Joseph was a cupcake. Then there's Judah. Other end of the spectrum. Son of an unloved woman. 12 boys, right? One daddy. 4 mamas. That had to be a fun house to grow up in. And Judah well remembered that time when Jacob put the 2 handmaids and their kids in front and his mama third and his favorite wife, Rachel, behind. He well remembered it. He well remembered his mom pleading with Jacob for attention, and Jacob just an awful lot of times, except for begetting some kids, just kind of ignored her because he didn't really love her. He loved Rachel. And so Judah well remembered those things. And he grew up with rough characters. Those boys were rough. And so Judah's just pretty cold-blooded. When you consider chapter 37, verse 26 and 27, Judah said unto his brethren, what profit is it if we slay our brother? I mean, this is about profit to him. I mean, kill him would be fine, but hey, we can make a little money. In fact, we can make 20 pieces of silver. 20 pieces of silver. And just cold-blooded as can be. Said down in chapter 31, verse 33. I don't know if I can't prove it, but maybe that's his idea too. I mean, okay, boys, quit your crying. And a couple of you I've seen, you look at me. We ain't telling our daddy nothing. Now kill that goat, dip that coat in that blood, and stop your sniveling. Because this is how we're going to do it. And if you don't want to do it that way, I'm going to pound you to death. He's cruel, real cruel. And so you go into Genesis 38 here for a minute, and again, a rough character. Links up with a rough character, Hira the Adullamite. Every time he goes out with Hira, he finds some woman to be with. Bad company. This is a man, Judah, that hangs out with bad company. In chapter 38, verses 3 through 10, you read about how, and you need to think about this. He begat through Shua, Onan, and Shelah. And both and Onan were wicked, so the Lord slew them, right? Okay, just do some math for a second. Joseph, I don't have it here immediately. Joseph was 17 when he went into Egypt, right? He was 30 when he stood before Pharaoh. Okay, if he's 17 when he goes into Egypt, he's there for 13 years before he stands before Pharaoh. Well, according to this, Genesis 38 in verse 1, it came to pass at that time, at the same time that Joseph was sold, that Judah went down from his brethren, turned into a certain Adullamite, who he then goes and meets Shua, who is the mother of Onan, and Shelah. Well, he then starts giving those boys away to marriage. But there's only 13 years between Joseph's imprisonment and standing before Pharaoh. So at the very most, that oldest boy was 13 years old when Judah gave him up for marriage. Do you get the sense he wasn't the best, most loving father in the world? You know what I'm saying? You think about it, you go do the math and see if I'm right or not. But he's not much of a father himself. Look on down in verse 12, 38:12. And in the process of time, the daughter of Shua, Judah's wife, died, and Judah was comforted and went up into his sheep herders to Timnath, he and his friend Hira the Adullamite. There's Hira again. Guess what he runs upon? He runs upon is actually his daughter-in-law. She makes herself out to be a harlot like we discussed last night. And he goes into her, and a few months later, he gets back word that she's pregnant and she wants to meet, out in the middle. And he says, this is just a whore, And she said, well, then whose signet and bracelet are these? And he goes, oh. Now, I don't know what exactly happened there. I know that somewhere along the way that Judah got on the potter's wheel. I wonder if when his own two wicked sons died, if he couldn't help but think about the boy that in all likelihood now was dead, Joseph. And I think as Tamar stood before that public arena and confronted Judah with his signet and his bracelet, which he'd given her in trust for the services that he bought. She winds up pregnant, and he says, I don't know this woman. She said, well, whose are these then, bud? And I picture the scene where at first he's standing there with his fists clenched, and he's ready to do something stupid. But then his fists release, and his face goes kind of blank, kind of poker-faced. And I wonder if in that moment, if he's thinking about his own mother. The mother who was unloved, put up in front of Rachel so she could be killed first. And those things. And a woman so desperate for husband's attention that she would hire his company with her son's mandrakes. And then he stands and looks at Tamar, who has now been widowed twice. He didn't keep his word to give her the third son, and she's so desperate for attention that she's willing to take her own father-in-law and have a child by him. And I can't help but wonder if he sits there and just his heart softens a little. Somewhere in there, there's a conscience work. See, the issue is, did Joseph have enough courage and character to overcome his plight? The issue with Judah is, did he have enough of a conscience to? So lo and behold, Joseph. We left him, so you pick him back up in Genesis 39. And Joseph arrives in Egypt. Back of kind of a paddy wagon with bars. And this is the spoiled, pampered brat. He's now enslaved, sold by hateful brethren, gets to Egypt. Those Ishmaelites, the first couple of days of the journey, whoever was head of it said, so how's the boy doing? They'd park at night, camp at night. How's the boy doing? I don't know. He's been crying like a woman all day. He's curled up in the back of the paddy wagon right now, and he won't eat anything, and he hasn't drunk any water as far as I know. I don't even know if he's going to make it. I don't know if he's going to be worth anything when we get to Egypt if he keeps this up. And so for about 2 days, Joseph is in the back of that wagon just crying and just can't seem to, just heartbroken that his own brethren would sell him off. But no, the Ishmaelites got to Egypt and went to Potiphar's house. Potiphar had put it in an order for somebody, and they said, well, I don't know if this is going to work or not, but, and one of the guys took Potiphar and said, now look, before we open this up, you see, I just want you to know this may not be your guy. Because I tell you what, he's in pretty rough shape. He said, well, let me see him. So they open up the gate, and there had been a transformation because somewhere along the way in that 2 days journey, Judah, or rather Joseph, had sucked it up. And while he was not in good shape, thinner, still a little beaten up, and certainly dehydrated, he still crawled out of the wagon himself and stood there before Potiphar and had his head down, of course, submitted and humbled. And so Potiphar ordered him, he said, I'll give him a try, ordered him to go get cleaned up and those sort of things. And as it turns out, Joseph sucked it up, served Potiphar faithfully. He just gave him a little bit at a time, but the more he gave him, the better Joseph handled it. By the time this thing is over, Potiphar doesn't even know what he has in his own house. He's not even aware of what he has. He didn't even bother to keep up with it because Joseph is so good, and he learned real quick that the Lord blessed what Joseph was doing. Now, this is a cupcake. This is a guy that was raised in privilege. This is a guy that was doted upon by his parents. But somewhere along the way in the back of the wagon, Joseph learned to gut it up. You see, none of it was his fault, but the Lord gave him a chance. And you know, it's a blessing the Lord didn't send him, to the quarry, because he might have died in the quarry, right? Instead, he allowed him to make his way in Potiphar's house. And like I said, none of this was Joseph's fault. You say, there's things that have happened to me in my life. It's not my fault. And I just haven't been able to get past it. You know what the Lord did for Joseph, even though it wasn't his fault? He handed him a shovel and said, dig out. He said, but it's not my fault. He said, but if you don't dig out, you're going to die. And so dig out. Joseph and Judah. See, Joseph comes from a position of being soft, being spoiled. You know what I do? I like my coffee in a warm cup. So in the morning when I get up to make coffee, I go in there after the coffee's brewed. I pray before I go get coffee. While the coffee's brewing, I pray. And you know what I do since I like, in the winter, coffee in a warm cup? I let the hot water run through the sink and run over my cup so the cup gets hot so it doesn't chill the coffee. I don't know what's wrong with people that drink chilled coffee. I don't understand. That is a ridiculous luxury. I didn't have to go draw the water from the well. I didn't have to go build a fire to heat the water. Instead, I just go in there and turn on the faucet, and water comes out for 30 seconds, and I'm like, when is this ever going to get warm? Put the coffee cup under there, and it'll gradually warm it up, and then I go put my hot coffee in my hot cup, and the coffee doesn't get cold so fast. Pretty soft. Pretty soft. I can't, but a lot of you can. You can adjust your thermostat at home with your phone. I just never got mine set up to do that. That is a ridiculous luxury. Cupcake. Let me ask you something. How's the Lord going to ever use you if he doesn't try you? If he ever doesn't put you through something? And I'm talking about something that's serious. I don't know what that'll be. Maybe it'll be a car accident. Maybe it'll be some sorrow. I don't know. I'm not trying to to scare you or anything. I know this. I haven't been through much of anything. I've never shed a drop of blood for Jesus Christ. I've never been to jail for anything I've done right or anything I've done wrong. Never been to jail at all. I did have a stroke in 2010, and by the end of the first day, my left side was down. I couldn't walk. I had to relearn to walk, and I couldn't lift my left arm. They had me there for a while in rehab, and what they would do would be they'd tie a broom or a broomstick onto my hand and say, "Okay, Kyle." So the broomstick is on the ground, and so the broomstick is taped to my hand like this, and they'd say, "Okay, push the broomstick away from your body." So like that. I couldn't push the broomstick away. I mean, it's not just that I couldn't lift my arm. I couldn't push the broomstick away with the end of the stick standing on the ground. And went into the hospital with this thing getting started, and they ran me through the MRI machine and the CAT scan and said, "Yep, there's something going on there, that's for sure." And so I spent 2 or 3 weeks in rehab. And I'm not telling you this to make you feel sorry for me or anything, but I've never been through anything. And that in the end wound up not being that much, because I've regained most everything that I lost. But I sure learned that God is good. I sure learned what it was. I tell you what, brethren, I know you know it, a lot of you know it, but there's a humiliation to being in a hospital, not being able to take care of your own needs. That is not fun for somebody that's 6'2", 250, and has always been able to move what he was trying to pick up. And so, you know what I'm talking about, but to have nurses have to come in and out and take care of business for me, it was all I could take. And to have middle-aged to older women have to take me and shower me off, I still have nightmares about it today. See, I'm not saying you're going to go through that, but we get awful filled with complaints. The truth of the matter is, most of us have been through nothing, not to speak of. Now, there's probably divorces represented here. I know there's been deaths. My mom and dad both died when I was fairly young. I was grown, but younger than most, and all those things. And we just look to the sky and go, "Why me?" This is the reason why you. Because if the Lord never gives you an opportunity to get on a potter's wheel to let him do something with you, you're going to remain a cupcake for the rest of your life. I don't think I'm the toughest guy in the room. I don't. I know I'm a big sissy. But, you have to come to grips with the fact that we've been told for a long time that things may go south. And they may go south. And I'm not talking about to Texas. They may go south. We may all, look, we haven't had it yet. Whatever you think about 2020 is not that bad. All of us are here tonight with our health. I know you may have lost someone. I know some folks that are gone because of it. I get it. Our church is still alive. In fact, the Lord blessed our church in 2020. Weird, right? So what are you saying? I'm saying somewhere along the way, you're going to be tested. You've already been tested. You've already been confronted this week with whether you will acknowledge some things that you know need to be fixed. And yet we still sit and we want more pink sprinkles. Right? I'm telling you, Joseph became a great man, but he never would have become the great man if he hadn't let God do with him what he did. Have you ever considered what would have happened had Joseph decided that he could pilfer a little of Potiphar's stuff on the side? Because he didn't. Have you ever considered what would have happened if he decided that when baby cakes came around, Potiphar's trophy wife, if he had decided to partake in that just a little bit, how things might have turned out? But to all those things, he said, no, no, no. He turns out to be one of the great men of the Bible. And you know the background that he came from? Being spoiled, being a cupcake. There's hope for us yet. Now here's Judah. I mean, and Judah is, like I said, Judah is a rough character. Judah, you wouldn't expect to find integrity in Judah. After all, he sold his brother. He's gone into one woman and didn't say he loved her. He just said he took her, had 3 kids by her, and then by the time it's over, he has his own daughter-in-law and that kind of stuff. She has to trap him to get him to do the right thing. But, he appears to have a conscience. And he stood there and looked at her, and you know what he said? He said a strange thing. Take your Bible and turn over to Genesis chapter 38. And notice, in this confrontation, Tamar, thy daughter-in-law, hath played the harlot. Also, behold, she is with child by whoredom. And Judah said, bring her forth, and let her be burnt. When she was brought forth, she sent to her father-in-law, saying, by the man whose these are, am I with child? And she said, discern, I pray thee, whose these are, the signet, the bracelets, and the staff. And oh man, and they were Judah's. Like I said, maybe Judah is standing there looking at her. I'm not sure. Maybe he's thinking of his own dead children and the fact that he was responsible for what he figures is his own brother's dead his life being gone now. And maybe he's thinking about his own mother, who was so despised by his father and so mistreated. I'm not sure, but there's a strange thing that came out of his mouth. He said in verse 26 that Judah acknowledged them and said, she hath been more righteous than I. Imagine that, the word righteous coming out of Judah's mouth. Something's working on that boy. This guy has found a conscience. And by the time a few more chapters pass, take this over if you will. Judah, whereas Joseph, the hole that he was in was not his fault. The Lord still had a shovel and said, you've got to dig out. Now, the hole that Judah was in was of his own making. And so the Lord handed him a shovel and said, you fix it. So I'm trying to convince you tonight that integrity matters, that character matters, and that how you handle hardship matters. Some of the hardship's not your fault. A good deal of it is. Take the shovel and fill in the hole. It has to be that way. Here is Judah. And Surprisingly, Judah at this point is surprisingly malleable. Look, if you will, in chapter 43. Chapter 43. Now, the brethren are before Joseph. They think they're before somebody else, of course. And they're scared to death that they're going to wind up losing Benjamin when they bring Benjamin into the land. Notice down in chapter 43, verse 9. This is Judah. Verse 8. Judah said unto Israel his father, Jacob doesn't want to send Benjamin into the land. I mean, Joseph wants to know if his full brother, little brother, Benjamin is alive. After all, they tried to kill him. So he's interested in knowing if Benjamin's alive. And so I want to see Benjamin. Well, of course, Jacob doesn't want to send Benjamin. And Judah said unto Israel his father, send the lad with me, and we will arise and go, that we may live and not die, both we and thou, and also our little ones. I will be surety for him. Of my hand shalt thou require it. He said, I will be surety. Now, big, brave, first brother Reuben. Look, if you will, in chapter 42, verse 37. Look at his offer and tell me the difference. Reuben should be the one that stands in line. Reuben should be the one that steps up to the plate. He's the firstborn. He's the oldest. He's the one that should have the care of his younger brethren. His offer, look down in verse 37. And Reuben spake unto his father, saying, slay my 2 sons if I bring him not to thee. What a generous offer. If I don't bring Benjamin back, you can kill my kids. Judah says, if I don't bring Benjamin back, I'll be staying. See the difference? See, somewhere along the way, somewhere in that process of that Tamar thing, and somewhere in the process of the Lord dealing by the pricks of conscience with Judah on his bed at night, the Lord did a work in his heart, and Judah's conscience is working again. Now notice, if you will, chapter 44, verse 18. Notice an interesting shift. Look in chapter 44, verse 18. As standing before Joseph, Judah, and he doesn't know it's Joseph. Judah stands and is going to offer himself and talk Joseph into letting Judah stay. Judah does that, but notice in 44:14, an interesting thing. Notice in 44:14 it says, and Judah and his brethren came into Joseph's house. Now that's the Lord acknowledging that Judah has risen in his sight. Because now it's not Reuben and his brethren. It should be Reuben and his brethren. Because Reuben's the elder. But now, no, it's Judah and his brethren. The Lord is acknowledging something that is happening inside of Judah. Can I ask you a question? How is your conscience? You live in a world full of corruption and pollution. How is your conscience? This has been dealt with already this week in different manners. But ladies and gentlemen, we're called to have a pure conscience before God and before men. I've been pricked this week. I had to get on my face and get some things straight. But how's your conscience? Because if there's one thing this world is out to do, it's to make you filthy. It's to make you where that thing doesn't work right. So you are free to go and do what you want to, set your eyes on what you want to set your eyes on. And it's not right. And you know what? You'll be saved, but you're not going to get anything at the judgment seat of Christ if you can't clear your conscience of some things. Here in this passage, here is Judah and Joseph both. And because of them both allowing God to do something in their lives, because they each had character, they each had integrity, Judah was tested by his courage. Does the kid have any courage? Does the kid have any backbone? And yes, he did. Judah, does the guy have a conscience at all? Yes, he did. And so I'll say this in closing. I'm just about done. You stop to think about the fact that for several years there, Judah's, or rather Israel's, the 12 tribes of Israel, the family, their entire survival, the fate, the destiny of the future nation of Israel rested entirely in the hands of a kid that had been raised a spoiled brat, who was a cupcake. But when the test came, he crawled out of the wagon and did the right thing, avoided adultery, avoided stealing, was as honest as the day was long. How are you doing when you're tested? When you're alone, how are you doing when you're tested? And as for Judah's part, that's where our Savior came from, right? That's where the Messiah, the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, came through. These are two of the two greatest men in the Bible, and they came from different ends of the world as far as their experiences are concerned. And they both passed the test. Integrity, character, honesty, hard work, being forthcoming. Those things count before God. They don't save you, but they count before God. Can we bow our heads and pray? Father, I pray tonight that you can use this, oh Lord. We live in a generation